welcome to the latest episode of Cross Continent Chats podcast. Before we start, we would like to acknowledge that we will be filming this podcast on the traditional Miccosukee and Tequesta lands in Miami, Florida, and the traditional Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, and Mississaugas of the Credit traditional lands in Toronto, Ontario. I am your host, Rachael Bishop, for this podcast, joined by my friend and colleague, Charlie Wayman, in Miami, Florida. So let's get right to it. We have a lot to cover this episode. So first off, I'd like to discuss the NBA and its return to play plan and its Disney World bubble. So now that we know that the NBA is going to allow families to come by the second round of playoffs, so probably September-ish, and we now know that players will be staying in luxurious accommodations. They'll have VIP service, concierge service, they'll have pool access, cinema access, etc. They'll be allowed to watch other games. Now that we know, and the best teams will be rewarded with the best hotels, how do you feel about the NBA's return to play bubble plan now that we know kind of they're going to sort of have a mini vacation almost?
Well, how I feel. If I were an NBA player, if I were a media guy, if I were anybody going to this Disney World bubble, I would feel great because you're getting these very luxurious accommodations. It's kind of almost a reward for, the hard work and to also deal with coronavirus. Coronavirus has really taken a toll, not just on the NBA, but on everybody. It's very tiring. It's very mentally exhausting. It's very hard to look at the news because it's the same depressing, awful stuff for the most part. It's either coronavirus or it's racial injustice with the BLM movements. But anyway, going back to Disney, I'm not surprised Disney went this route. Disney has the facilities. Disney has the power. Disney has the money. Of course, they're going to go all out for this thing. So it's really nice to see that Disney is contributing so much, partly because they are the sponsor of the Orlando Magic, appropriately named the Magic, but it's really amazing to see Disney go out and do this. No other league in the world has even been able to accomplish this, and this is really the best case scenario out of any sports league. You have all of the 22 teams that are going to compete. You're going to have playoffs, so you're going to have playoff battles still with the teams that are still trying to get in, and it's all going to be in one bubble in Orlando. It's going to be something, and I'm looking forward to it.
I definitely think it'll be interesting for sure. And the thing that I'm most interested to see is how they've arranged the accommodations by team, like by standing. So the best teams are what I'm assuming is the best hotel, the Grand Destino, then there's the Grand Paradiso and the Yacht Club. So some of the teams in the Grand Destino include the Toronto Raptors, the LA Lakers, and the LA Clippers, which means that it's going to be a 2019 Toronto Raptors championship reunion with Danny Green and Kawhi Leonard being reunited with their Raptors buddies. So Mafusi Chef will be reunited with Fun Guy. So Mafusi Chef is Serge Ibaka and Fun Guy is Kawhi Leonard, for those of you who don't know. And they're really good friends. So I think that would be really fun to see them reunited and hanging out again like old times last year.
Yeah, and hopefully, this is a perfect time for Danny Green to get his ring that he hasn't received yet. He's the only Raptors player to not have his championship ring. And the fact that he can have it in the same building with the Toronto Raptors there, Kawhi Leonard there, would be perfect. So maybe they'll sneak it into the Disney facility and he can finally get his Toronto Raptors ring.
I think that would be a great idea, especially as you said, he'd be in the same hotel as his teammates. So it really would be like he was back in Toronto playing the Raptors, getting his own ring. I think that'd be kind of neat to do. For sure, it'd be a lot of fun, and especially to have Kawhi Leonard there because this is the first season that Kawhi Leonard hasn't played with Danny Green, so they're good buddies as well. So that would be something fun to see. So I think that NBA plan is definitely an interesting one for sure, and I'll definitely look forward to that and the possible ring ceremonies, and maybe there'll be some shenanigans that come out of Disney World. You never know. There's always you never know with NBA players and Disney World. I'm sure there'll be some players who try to sneak away from the little bubble to to have a night on the town or a night in the park, maybe, to the NFL, a league not quite as functional as the NBA, a little dysfunctional, shall we say. The Los Angeles Chargers, formerly the San Diego Chargers, now the Los Angeles Chargers, have added Colin Kaepernick to the team workout list. However, the head coach of the Chargers says that Kaepernick will not be working out with the team anytime soon. Not sure whether this is coronavirus related or just the fact that he doesn't think Kaepernick will have a shot. So with that being said, obviously he's been in the news a lot lately. So do you think that Kaepernick deserves another shot in the NFL? Why and why not?
Well, I'm just gonna, this man really is quite something. He's a heck of an activist. He's definitely, really accomplished himself and set himself as really the father of a movement, so to speak. But with my answer to this, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about his kneels. I'm not going to talk about his lawsuit. I'm not going to talk about that. I want to talk about him as a player. Colin Kaepernick played 6 seasons in the NFL. In these 6 seasons, he had a 59.8 completion percentage, which means he completed almost 60% of his passes to his players, which is subpar. Really, the top players, for example, a Drew Brees, a Peyton Manning, a Tom Brady, a Russell Wilson, and a Patrick Mahomes, those players hit 65% and up. So he was already subpar as a passer. His running ability when he played was fantastic. That man had wheels. He could run, he could make moves, he can scramble. That was what he was best at. In his 6 seasons, he earned 12,271 passing yards, which is, a little more than 2,000 yards passing a season, which really isn't fantastic. But you know what? Like any other player, he deserves at least a chance to work out to see if he impresses an NFL team. What concerns me is not his ability. He could become a wide receiver because he's got wheels, he's got legs, but he wants to play quarterback. My concern with him is not his ability. It's not the fact that he can play in the NFL or not. Kaepernick, how do I put it? Kaepernick really took this to heart, and he eventually, because of doing this, he found himself out of the league. He did do his lawsuit where he thought he was being blackballed by the NFL, and he won, which is a big deal. And nobody heard from him after that for the most part, odds and ends, Twitter, so on and so forth. And then in 2019, in November, the NFL did something that they normally don't do, which is set up a workout with all 32 teams in attendance to watch him play, to watch him work out, to see what he could do. And 30 minutes before the NFL was doing his workout, he had a problem with the waivers, and he wanted things more on his terms than the NFL's terms, which to me doesn't make any sense because you're trying to play in the NFL. So you have to follow the league's terms and the league's rules. So he decided 30 minutes before to move to a separate facility at a high school about an hour away. And then in the end, only 7 teams went to that because at the last minute, he decided to essentially mess with the NFL. And, a variety of analysts, especially on ESPN, were saying, you know what, he really just doesn't want to play. He just did that as a publicity stunt, as a show. The other interesting thing is that after all that happened, in February, Kaepernick was speaking to the Alliance of American Football and the XFL about playing football there because clearly after that stunt with the workout, doesn't look like he was going to be in the NFL anytime soon. Well, XFL quarterbacks are paid $250,000 a season. Alliance of American Football quarterbacks, the max quarterbacks, are also paid around $250,000 a season. Colin Kaepernick wanted $20 million a season, which is crazy. If these leagues that do not nearly make as much money as the NFL, he's asking for NFL starter money. at 20 million a season in leagues that just don't have this kind of finances. So of course, the Alliance of American Football and the NFL and the XFL, said no, obviously not. That's just crazy. That's just ludicrous. And he hasn't really had an opportunity since until now, where the LA Chargers are willing to give him a workout. Will he? He could. I don't think he's a starter. He could be a backup. He could also be a fill-in quarterback for the Chargers' recent draft pick, Justin Herbert, to give him a season just to make sure that he works out the kinks and he can adapt himself to the NFL level. But I also don't think that he's going to beat out the current slotted starter, which is Tyrod Taylor, whose nickname is T-Mobile, because he is so able and he can do anything with the ball. Tyrod Taylor is a proven starter in this league. He is effective. He can run. He can throw. He can do everything. So give him the workout because of his physical ability, even though he is 32. We can see quarterbacks do well at 38 and in their 40s, aka Drew Brees and Tom Brady. So give him the workout. Everybody deserves the chance to work out. Whether he becomes a player in the NFL, I don't think he's going to be a starter. But who knows? If he maybe switches his position from quarterback to wide receiver or something like that, he could actually excel and actually have a job in the league. But in the end, it's all up to him, and it's up to his ego and his attitude, in my opinion.
I think that was very well said, for sure. And I really like how you focused on his actual stats as a football player, and you looked at it that way, and rather than letting your emotion cloud your judgment, which I think was really good, which is what we're seeing a lot of people do now, unfortunately. So
no, I appreciate that, and I'll say it. I'm with him. I love the fact that he kneeled. I watched the Liverpool game and against Everton, and they kneeled. What he's done is amazing, and you could really talk about what he's been able to do, and that kneeling symbol as something almost godlike, in the sense of he's like a Malcolm X, he's like a Dr. King, but he's in this generation because look what he's done. And it's amazing for what he's been able to do, and it's amazing that he's standing up for what he believes is right. And I agree that it's right, because there is way too many issues with racial injustice in this country, in the US and in Canada. So towards all minorities, the history is quite appalling, to be honest. But this is not a history podcast. So I admire him for that. But I just wanted to look at this from a player perspective and his actual ability.
I think that was the right decision, for sure. And just before we move on, just a further note that we're actually filming this on National Indigenous Day in Canada. So we talked about minorities. That's a group that definitely knows all about that. And so it's just neat that we have a day to celebrate that. So moving on now from Kaepernick, still sticking with the NFL though, and a bit of CFL. This has been kind of an ongoing issue for a while, but obviously now with what's happening in the world, as we've just discussed, there's been more talks for the Washington Redskins to change the team name, along with the Edmonton Eskimos of the CFL to change the team name of that as well. But the owner of the Redskins, Dan Snyder, says he's not doing that. So really my question to you is, why do you think the owners of these teams, and of course the Cleveland Indians, that's another issue, that's baseball, but it's a smaller issue. Why do you think the owners of these teams are so reluctant to change names like Redskins, Eskimos, and Indians?
Well, before I fully answer that question, I want to get into the Cleveland Indians a little bit. Of course, Christopher Columbus is the one who named them Indians, because he literally believed that, he was landing in India, not in the Americas. But even though in Canada, essentially, Indians is definitely officially seen as a politically incorrect term, which in my honest opinion it is. But here in the US, it's still a very commonly used term. You see it in museums, you see it in educational institutions, you see it all over the place. For example, viewers, you heard about the Miccosukee and the Takesta tribe at the beginning. The Miccosukee logo, if you look at it, says the Miccosukee Indian tribe. A lot of natives have actually just adopted the name. And that might change in the future. They might change their mind. But at this moment, there are native tribes that have just adopted the name Indian. They call themselves Indians. So in the U.S., we're not really at the point of getting, outlawing, I guess, so to speak, the word Indian. So for the Cleveland Indians, I think that name isn't going to change for a while, because currently, it's still a commonly used term in the United States. What was smart by them was years ago was get rid of their logo called Chief Wahoo. If you don't know what that was, it's basically a red Indian with a really stupid smile on his face. And you could tell how offensive it was. But they got rid of that. Now they have an eye on their hat, and they have the word Indians across their jersey. So for the Cleveland Indians, that's definitely not going to change anytime soon. It's all a matter of opinion, and the U.S. just isn't there at that point. Now, getting into the Redskins and the Eskimos, yeah, absolutely. I believe that it's time to change that. There is absolutely no excuse to call the team the Washington Redskins, especially because it's the capital city of the United States, and it has a racist name. Isn't that something? But I think what's going through his mind is Dan Snyder is just probably just a man set in his ways. He doesn't want to change it. And he probably thinks that this is a phase, that, he's just going to wait it all out for everybody to calm down. And then he's not going to, he's just going to wait it all out. And that's what I honestly think that's probably going through his mind. Obviously, he's hearing the scrutiny now, and he doesn't want to change it. He just doesn't want to. He would have done it by now if he agreed. Mm-hmm. That would have been done ages ago. But he just doesn't want to. And it's probably the same thing with the Edmonton Eskimos. Just because there's some protests happening right now, everybody is now going, towards trying to rectify rights and change names and take down some monuments and statues and so on and so forth. And, these owners, they just believe, things will go back to normal. They won't go back to normal, owners. You guys need to change and get with the times. It's not okay to call them Eskimos and to call them Redskins. Very much so. So that's what I think is kind of going through their mind, unfortunately. I wish I had a more positive view of that.
Is the Redskins logo also racist?
I don't see it as racist. It's pretty much like a side profile of a Native American head. It's not like goofy or like Chief Wahoo in any way.
Okay.
It's a side profile of just a Native American head. He has the color is obviously yellow and red, and he has two feathers hanging from his hair.
Okay.
I don't see it as offensive, because it's just the profile of a Native American head.
Right.
But really, it's up to the tribes, because it's not me. If they find it offensive, okay, it's in a similar profile to the Chicago Blackhawks, but they actually did get approval from the tribe for that one. So
that's what I was gonna say. It doesn't seem like it'd be offensive. It seems like it, but it seems like it could be an example of cultural appropriation, right? You don't get the approval from those tribes. So,
well, that's the whole thing. Is the Chicago Blackhawks got the approval of the tribe, and to be honest, I love that, because that's the original culture of the area of this country, is the Native American culture. So I would like to see teams embrace more things, but just do them responsibly with approval from the tribes. That's the way I see it.
I agree with you. Well, hopefully they change their name, because even if they keep the logo, they definitely should change the name, because it's, as you said, those neither one of those names is okay in this day and age. So they've never been okay in my view, but it was probably when the teams were formed, it was a very different time back then. So moving away from that now, trying to get back onto more fun topics. We don't want to make this too much of a political podcast. There's news for that. Moving on to more fun topics now, I want to talk a bit about soccer. In particular, I want to talk about Canada's new favorite hero, Alphonso Davies. So Alphonso Davies just clocked the fastest time in the Bundesliga history at 36.5 kilometers an hour. That's a new Bundesliga speed record. So that's how much he ran in one run. So now that he's been named Rookie of the Year in his first full season, and now that he's clocked that fastest time, and really he's kind of taken the league by storm since its return from COVID, my question to you is just how good can he be? Just how high do you see his ceiling going?
Well, there's a couple of things I want to touch up on. First of all, just because you set a speed record and you're the fastest player doesn't exactly mean that you're going to be a superstar. For example, a really good example of that is who used to be the fastest player in the world. His name is Theo Walcott. He got the record at Arsenal, but now he never turned out into a prolific scorer, or a dynamic winger like he was supposed to be. He also had a lot of injury issues as well. So, a player as fast and dynamic as Theo Walcott just never panned out. So with me, I'm a little testy about speed records because just because you're fast doesn't exactly mean that you're going to be the best soccer player. That's my honest opinion. With Alphonso Davies, he's 19 years old. He's got the potential to be. He's got the world in his hands. He could be a superstar. He could be a fallout. He could be a dropout. I mean, you don't really know. He's shown promise, but I think if he really wants to achieve the best he can and grow as a player, I think that at some point after 4 or 5 years that he should move on from Germany. He's in the team that has dominated the Bundesliga for so long, Bayern Munich. They are the best team. They have the most money, and everybody else except for Borussia Dortmund, Red Bull Leipzig, and Borussia Mönchengladbach, and Bayern Leverkusen. Other than those teams, everybody else isn't great. So for the most part, he's playing easy opponents. They're just not at the level. It's just Bayern Munich is just dominating every year. So it's not really strong competition. I think if he made a move to England where the competition's a lot more physical and they're a lot stronger and they're a lot more intense, I think he could really take his talents there. I could see him on a team like Tottenham. I could see him on a team like Arsenal. I could also see him on a team that I think would be really nice and up and coming. But I could see him on a team like Wolves. I could also see him on a team Liverpool. He's an effective left back. He's basically like the Canadian version of Trent Alexander-Arnold at this point. And I think if he wants to achieve this, and I think if he wants to become a world-class player, he needs to get out of Germany at some point during his prime.
Well, he just signed a new 5-year contract extension with Bayern Munich. I think his original contract was supposed to end in 2023 or something, so he just signed a new extension, but that doesn't mean anything in soccer, really, right? And as long as players often don't fulfill their contract and they just get transferred anyway. So I don't think that means much, but that would basically take him right to his prime anyways, which would be perfect for him to make the move to England, as you just said.
Yeah, that's where I think he will excel. The English league is the best league in the world, so I think he really will shine there, or he has the potential to shine there.
And we've already seen, obviously this is just a very small sample, but we already saw him dazzle this season against Chelsea in Champions League, which is, usually a top English team. So he can do that, and he's even going to get better. Maybe he'll do better as he gets even older in the English league for sure.
Yep, definitely.
So moving on now to both of our favorite sports. It's hockey, specifically the NHL. So the NHL has now announced their 24 play-in series. So play-in 24 teams, sorry. So it's a best of 5 for teams 5 through 12 in each conference, and it's basically a play-in to get to the first round of the playoffs, and the first 4 teams have a bye, essentially. And if you don't win your play-in series, then you automatically get entered into the lottery and have a chance of getting Alexis Lafreniere, who's the consensus overall number 1 projected pick this season. So with that big preamble behind us, I would like to look at one series in particular I think is quite interesting, and it's in the Eastern Conference. We have the Carolina Hurricanes versus the New York Rangers. So you have one team in the Rangers that was not expected to do well. They were expected to be closer to the lottery, but they've played very well, largely due to their MVP season of Artemi Panarin. And then you have the Carolina Hurricanes, a young up-and-coming team. Both teams are young, up and coming with some good talent, but they're unproven in the playoffs. So who do you think will win this series and why, and at how many games?
Okay, so the play-in series is a best of 5. And this one's a hard one to think about. But I'm going to channel my inner Rachel and say the goaltender is the most important player on your team. And if you look at let's look at the Carolina Hurricanes. The Carolina Hurricanes have an awesome defense. They have a very interesting offense. They've got a bunch of unproven playoff talent in Sebastian Aho, Andrei Svechnikov, and actually he's a little bit older, but because he hasn't been in the playoffs really very much at all, Vincent Trocheck. Vincent Trocheck is a player who was the heart and soul of the Florida Panthers before Dale Challen mistakenly traded him to the Carolina Hurricanes. Vincent Trocheck has a potential. He's got speed, he's got style, he's got scoring ability. He's also got charisma, and I think he could be a huge factor in these playoffs. Show the playoffs what he's got. But like I said with the goaltender, they have Peter Mrazek and James Reimer. While the Carolina Hurricanes had a fairy tale run all the way to the Stanley Cup Eastern Conference Finals.
Last season.
Yes, last season. It's important to know that typically when teams do this, when it's unexpected, they regress. And I think they're going to regress this year. They do have some playoff experience in players like their captain, Jordan Staal, who I believe won a cup with the 2009 Pittsburgh Penguins.
He did. That's
there
correct.
You go. So he could also be a huge factor as well as a leader. Another player on the Hurricanes that I really like is James Reimer. James Reimer, he is definitely a journeyman goaltender in the league. He has proven that he can play. He's proven that he can be a fringe starter. He has playoff experience. Yeah. Let's just hope that he can mentally be there after he got destroyed by the Boston Bruins in the 2013 Stanley Cup playoffs, because that's obviously a heartbreaking thing for him, because of that last game, it essentially punched his ticket out of Toronto because the fans and the organization unfairly gave Reimer the shaft, in my opinion. But now let's talk about the Rangers. The Rangers have something that the Hurricanes don't have. And what they have is a Stanley Cup contending goaltender. He is old. He hasn't been great recently, but it's Henrik the King Lundqvist. He is a playoff performer. He could potentially pull a Braden Holtby. And what I mean by that is when the Capitals were doing their Stanley Cup run a couple of years ago, they put in, because Holtby had a terrible season and Grubauer had an okay season, they put in Philip Grubauer for their first 2 games. That didn't work out in the playoffs. When they put in Braden Holtby, guess what? They won the Cup. So what the Rangers could do is let's see, what their young goaltender can do. I believe it's Georgiev, what he can do. But I think I wouldn't be surprised if they put Henrik in just because of his experience, just because he's been on contending teams. He's been on a Stanley Cup final team. He's been to an Eastern Conference final. He's got tons of playoff experience. So that is a big factor. The other big factor that I see is a player named Artemi Panarin. Artemi Panarin has a huge amount of experience in the Stanley Cup playoffs. He was a former member of the Chicago Blackhawks. Having him and his leadership on the first line, and also he's been having a ridiculous season, I think it's really going to make a difference. The other player that I would really like to see rise and shine, that he just hasn't showed up at all, is the Rangers rookie, Kaapo Kakko.
That's right.
He hasn't been around. He hasn't really showed up, but we know he's got talent. We know he's got skill. He's had coronavirus to settle his nerves. I would like to see him go back to why he was picked second overall. So simply because of goaltending, and simply because I kind of like their forward lines a little bit better, and their forward depth, I would pick the Rangers in 5 games.
Going with the upset there.
Why not? We've had some fluky NHL years, so let's have another fluke. Why don't we?
Well, I did pick the Jets over the Flames, and I think people would consider that an upset. So,
very true.
Anyways, just quick thing on the Rangers. I believe they have gone with 3 goaltenders this season, and Lundqvist hasn't even dressed in the last couple months before coronavirus. So who knows if he'll even dress? They might go with Georgiev, and then I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but Shestakarin, the Russian, as the 2 young kids. They might just go with them and not even have Lundqvist dress. So we'll have to keep an eye on what they decide, what head coach David Quinn decides to do with that.
Yeah, in my honest opinion, I think they should dress him and just have him as, if they don't start him, have him as a backup, just because he'll be a voice in the locker room.
Exactly. I would go with that over 2 rookie goalies in the playoffs. Is kind of, it's questionable, I would say. But then again, I'm not a coach, so what do I know? So now that concludes the conversation or question and answer portion of this podcast. So now we move on to our segments. And the first segment that we have today is Charlie's segment that we like to call Sports Spectacles. So this is where Charlie previews the upcoming games from this week and just gives some tips and tidbits of who to look for and teams to watch out for. So take it away, Charlie.
For my sports spectacles for the week. So we know Premier League is back. And if you've been following, the buzz around the Premier League is, but when are Liverpool FC going to break the 30-year spell and win? Well, because due to their draw at Goodison Park, it's going to have to be a little bit longer. It is still mathematically possible that if Man City, depending on a Man City result, but we're going to look at Wednesday, the 24th of June, Liverpool and Crystal Palace. Interestingly enough, Liverpool, they can win it on this. Liverpool are playing a team that they faced in the past when it comes to title contention. In the 2013 season, Liverpool was a point away from being first place and being crowned champions. But they actually blew a lead and they lost to Crystal Palace, which secured Manchester City, interestingly enough, the title. Manchester City at that time was managed by Manuel Pellegrini, and a certain Liverpool player named James Milner, who is a fan favorite, and he is a leader on the team, was on that winning team by Manchester City. The only player from that 2013 team that really is still around prominently is Jordan Henderson. And actually, I think Adam Lallana was on there as well. I could be totally wrong. So it's just interesting to see this kind of history repeat itself, so to speak. Another team that I really want to look at for this is Wolverhampton Wanderers and Bournemouth Cherries. Bournemouth is a relegation team, so they're looking to excel. They're looking to be stars. They're looking to get out of the relegation zone because they don't want to be relegated and sent down to the championship. Wolverhampton is a team where they've excelled. They're one of the greatest success stories in recent Premier League history in terms of staying up at the top. Many relegation teams are only up for one season and then they come back down. But the thing is, sometimes Wolverhampton just kind of has chinks in their armor, so to speak, and it shows that they don't have it together all the time. So Bournemouth is going to play hard. Wolves, people are so rusty. Wolves could collapse. So I think that's going to be a really good match to watch. Another thing to note is that the Italian league is starting up again, and it's nice to see a whole different league. And the match to watch, same day on Wednesday the 24th, is Atalanta and Lazio. Those two teams, Atalanta is in fourth place, and Lazio is in second place, 1 point behind the current leaders, Juventus. So this is going to be a battle for a Champions League place. It's going to be a battle for where you place, and it's also a battle for the Serie A money. So definitely that is another one to check out if you're into Italian soccer. If you prefer a more defensive league, check out Italian Serie A. Another game that I would like to note is Thursday, the 25th of June. You have Southampton and Arsenal. So Arsenal they've been god-awful their first two games. They've also had a great amount of injuries, and how do I put it? They need a reset. They need to get a win, because if this isn't looking well for Mikel Arteta's men. But they're going to be playing a relegation team in Southampton. Although Southampton is a relegation team, they have a prolific striker fresh from Liverpool, funny enough. His name is Danny Ings, and he is top 3 or top 4 of the scoring this season. He's been absolutely electric, on fire, and he's pretty much the sole reason that this team is not number 20 in the league. So Arsenal can make it up. They have two prolific scorers in Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and Alexandre Lacazette. And there's Danny Ings. If Danny Ings can get through the Arsenal's defense, which really isn't hard to do these days, they've had a really hard go of it, and they totally need a revamped center back system. Southampton could actually win this, which is kind of surprising to hear. So definitely check that one out. And then one more match that I really want to get into, that I think is a really important match, is in the Bundesliga. It is Freiburg versus Schalke. No, these are not two top 4 teams, but Freiburg and Schalke are middle of the pack teams, and they're vying for a Europa League spot. These two teams, Freiburg just suffered a 3-1 defeat at Bayern Munich, but the fact that they scored 1 goal against Bayern Munich is actually pretty impressive, and I really think Freiburg is going to take it. Schalke's good, but Schalke's not that good. So that's definitely going to be a great battle to see, for supremacy in terms of the Europa League spots. And those are my sports spectacles for the week.
We will go to the new segment that I have, which is called the Marketplace, which I started last week, and I have not as many transfers for you this week, but some more news in the marketplace world. So the first, since we've just talked about soccer, we'll continue with the soccer train. So the first is about this player called Leroy Sané. He currently plays for Manchester City, but contracts normally run out at the end of June. But due to coronavirus, obviously they've been extended. However, he has decided not to extend his contract with Manchester City. So that means that after June, in 2 weeks. He will no longer be on the team, which is notable because he's really good, but he hasn't been playing much under Pep Guardiola, who's the manager. And he has been injured this season, so he hasn't played at all this season. But he will most likely go back to Bayern Munich, so that's another superstar that Bayern Munich will be getting. He's German, so that is quite notable. We don't know what exactly the money is. I saw today that it could be 40 million euros for a new contract. Again, soccer rumors, take that with a grain of salt, but that's just another player that Bayern Munich will be getting who will make them dominate the league even more. As Charlie's mentioned, they dominate the German league, so definitely that's not fair. For other German teams, for sure, they will not like that. And the other one that's of note also in soccer is this player called Edinson Cavani. So I mentioned last week that he will be leaving Paris Saint-Germain at the end of the season, and now we know that he will not be renewing his contract with PSG after June. They, of course, have ended the season due to coronavirus, but there's the Champions League is still hoping to come back, so they will be coming back in August for Champions League. However, he will not be taking part as he's leaving the team after June, so we don't know where he's going to go. One possibility, as I mentioned last time, which really annoys me, is Inter Miami, which of course is the Miami team in MLS, run by none other than David Beckham. And if David Beckham can bring players to MLS, anyone can bring players to MLS, it is David Beckham. He is, after all, the superstar who brought MLS onto the map. And further to that note, Cavani speaks Spanish. Miami is a very Latin city, so he will fit right in with the Latinos and Latinas in Miami. So that's definitely a place where he could end up. He could also end up in Premier League, but you never know if he ends up in Inter Miami, which automatically makes him a contender, which is just not fair. But you know what, life isn't fair. So moving on from that now, finishing up with some hockey in the marketplace. There was a little bit of a brouhaha on Penguins Twitter last week because Penguins starting goaltender, well, he's not been starting this season, but he's won them 2 Stanley Cups as a rookie, funnily enough, which nobody has ever done, not even Ken Dryden or Patrick Waugh. So Matt Murray, the former Penguins starting goalie, went on an unfollow spree on Instagram and unfollowed the Penguins along with several other Pittsburgh Penguins players. So he unfollowed the official account and several other players. He only follows about 5 Penguins players and some of their wives on Instagram. Apparently, this is the big deal when you unfollow a lot of people on Instagram, and a lot of people have been saying that this means that his time in Pittsburgh is coming to an end. A lot of fans do not like him because he's not Marc-Andre Fleury, who is a very beloved figure in Penguins history, and fans have been trying to run him out of town. So I would definitely keep my eye out for Matt Murray. What's interesting about that is that their current starter this year, Tristan Jarry, who's outplayed Matt Murray, is a year younger, and his contract is up this season. So the Penguins are tight to the cap, as they always are, so they could decide to just extend Jarry, and they might not have room to keep both of them, and then they'll trade Matt Murray. My view is they'll probably trade him at the end of this season or the end of next season before the expansion draft, so they'll get something for him, or they'll just lose him to the expansion draft for the NHL Seattle team, which is going to start play next fall in 2021. So I definitely think that Matt Murray's time will be coming to an end in Pittsburgh very soon, and the Penguins will go forth with Tristan Jarry, and then they'll just bring back Casey D. Smith, who actually got sent down to the AHL because it couldn't afford to keep him, and he's a capable backup for Jarry at the NHL level. So that's something that I think is interesting worth checking out. So that concludes really the marketplace segment for today, because there's not been too much to talk about in terms of that aspect. So with that brings us to the end of this episode. So once again, I've been Rachel Bishop in Toronto, Ontario, joined by my friend and colleague, Charlie Wayman. Hope everybody stays safe out there, tries to stay cool. It's very hot, and enjoy the summer since it's officially summer. Thanks very much.